Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see what if Issei was trained by Ophis. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. The night air around Kuo Academy was unusually still, the kind of eerie calm that usually preceded a storm. Issei Haidu, fresh from another grueling day at school, dragged his feet along the deserted pathway that led back home. His thoughts whirled with fantasies of Rias, Akeno, and the other lovely ladies in his life, but even that wasn't enough to completely distract him from the growing unease gnawing at his chest. Something was off tonight, and he couldn't quite place what. He stopped for a moment, looking up at the sky. The stars above shimmered faintly, but a thick blanket of clouds was slowly creeping in, dimming their light. It was an odd sensation, like the very air had been drained of its warmth, leaving only a cold vacuum behind. Before Issei could shake the feeling off, a soft, lilting voice called out to him. "You seek power." Issei spun around, eyes wide. The voice wasn't familiar, soft yet somehow commanding, a contradiction of delicate strength. And then, standing before him, was a figure that seemed almost ethereal in the dim light. "Ophis," Issei breathed out. He had seen her before, briefly, during tense moments with the Cow's Brigade. The infinite dragon god, a being of unparalleled power, who had seemed uninterested in him at the time. Now, however, her attention was solely on him, and it sent a shiver down his spine. She was smaller than he'd expected, her appearance like that of a young girl with long, black hair that spilled down her back, pale skin like porcelain, and cold, empty eyes that seemed to pierce through everything. But despite her delicate form, the raw power emanating from her was unmistakable. It was suffocating. "Is there something you need?" Issei stammered, unsure of how to address a literal god of infinity. His mind raced through all the possible scenarios. Was she here to kill him? Did she want something from Rias? Or was she just bored? Ophis didn't move closer. Her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "You possess Drag, the Red Dragon Emperor. His power is vast, but it is not enough." Her voice was emotionless, like stating a fact of the universe. "You want more power." Issei blinked. More power. Sure, he thought about it. After all, he constantly found himself fighting enemies stronger than he could handle, always relying on a last-minute boost from Drake or his friends to pull through. And of course, there was the matter of protecting the people he cared about: Rias, Asia, Akeno. They deserved someone who could stand at the front and never falter. But was that what Ophis meant? "Well, yeah," Issei admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I mean, who wouldn't want to get stronger? Especially if it means I can protect the people I care about." Ophis's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered ever so slightly, as though she had expected that answer. "I can give you power," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, but carrying weight like a boulder. "The power of infinity. I will train you." Issei's heart skipped a beat. Infinity. Train him. The very concept of such power sounded impossible. And yet, here stood Ophis, offering it to him as if it were a simple thing. He knew the kind of strength Ophis commanded: legendary, godlike. But was this a joke? Why him? Why now? "Why me?" he asked cautiously. "I mean, no offense, but you're Ophis. You could train anyone. Why would you want to train a guy like me?" Ophis tilted her head slightly, her expression as unreadable as ever. "You are an anomaly. Your connection to Drake is unique, and you possess potential beyond what is known. Power attracts power." Issei frowned, trying to make sense of it. An anomaly. He'd always known he was special because of Drake, but this was the first time someone had framed it in this way. Was Ophis saying that his boosted gear was more than just a tool of power? His mind raced with the possibilities. The power of infinity. What could that even mean? His boosted gear could amplify his strength, sure, but infinity, that was something else entirely. "So you're saying you can make me as strong as you?" he asked hesitantly. Ophis's gaze seemed to sharpen. "No. You will never be as strong as me. But you will wield infinity." There it was again. Infinity. The word seemed to carry a weight of its own, like a promise and a curse all wrapped into one. Issei knew this wasn't just about getting stronger. There was more to it, something he couldn't quite grasp yet. But still. He thought of Rias, of Akeno, of Asia. All the times they had been in danger, all the times he had barely scraped through. If he had the power of infinity, would he never have to worry about losing them again? Would he be able to protect them, always? His decision was made before he even realized it. "Okay," he said, a determined glint in his eyes. "I'll do it. I'll train with you." For the first time, Ophis's lips curled into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Very well," she said. "We will begin tomorrow." Before Issei could ask her what that meant, she vanished, leaving nothing but the chilling stillness of the night behind. He stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. What had he gotten himself into? The power of infinity. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than Ophis had told him. The next day at Kuo Academy, Issei couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. Every moment, every breath seemed heavier with the weight of what was to come. Even his usual antics with his friends felt forced, as if a part of him was disconnected from the world around him. Ria's, ever perceptive, noticed immediately. "Issei," she said, pulling him aside after classes ended. Her crimson hair caught the light of the setting sun, making her look ethereal. "You've been acting strange all day. Did something happen?" Issei hesitated, scratching the back of his head. He couldn't exactly tell her about Ophis. Not yet. How could he explain that he had agreed to train under the infinite dragon god herself without sounding completely insane? "It's nothing, President," he lied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just tired, I guess." Ria's frowned, clearly not buying it. Her sapphire eyes searched his face, as if trying to read the thoughts behind his mask. Issei felt a pang of guilt. He hated lying to her, especially when she looked at him like that, but what else could he do? "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" she said softly, her hand resting gently on his arm. Issei's heart skipped a beat. Her concern for him was genuine, and he felt the weight of his decision even more in that moment. He wanted to protect her, to be strong enough that she never had to worry about him. "I know," he said quietly. "I promise, I'll tell you everything soon. I just need to figure something out first." Ria's gave him a long, searching look before nodding, though her worry didn't fade entirely. "Alright," she said softly. "But don't keep me in the dark for too long, Issei. I care about you." As she walked away, Issei watched her, a mixture of emotions swirling inside him. He didn't want to keep secrets from her, but Ophis' offer had changed everything. He was stepping into a world he barely understood, and the power of infinity was just the beginning. Whatever was coming next, he could only hope that he would still be the same Issei Haidu when it was over. The world around Issei dissolved into darkness. One moment he was standing in the courtyard of Kuo Academy, the next, he was nowhere. It was impossible to tell where he was. There was no ground beneath his feet, no sky above, just an endless expanse of black. The air felt thick, suffocating, like being submerged deep underwater. Issei's body felt weightless and heavy at the same time, a strange contradiction that made him uneasy. Ophis stood in front of him, her expression unreadable as always. The infinite dragon god had transported him to this strange place between worlds, a void where time and space seemed to twist and warp. Here, she would train him, she had said. "Where are we?" Issei asked, his voice sounding muffled, as though the very air was absorbing his words. "A place beyond your world," Ophis replied calmly, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Time does not flow here as it does in the realm of humans. We will train here until you are ready." Issei gulped, feeling a chill crawl up his spine. This place had felt wrong, unnatural, like something his very soul rejected. But this was the price for power, wasn't it? If he wanted to protect Rias, Akeno, Asia, and everyone he cared about, he had to become stronger. And if Ophis, the infinite dragon god, was willing to teach him, then he couldn't afford to back down. "Alright," he said, squaring his shoulders. "I'm ready." Ophis regarded him with those cold, unblinking eyes for a moment, then extended her hand. "Then we begin." Before Issei could react, a wave of energy surged from Ophis's hand, enveloping him completely. He gasped, his body jerking as the raw power surged through him, burning like fire and freezing like ice all at once. His vision blurred, and his mind was assaulted with 1,000 sensations: pain, heat, cold, and something else, something vast and terrifying. This was the power of infinity. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks though, in the void, it was impossible to tell how much time had passed. Ophis's training was relentless. She pushed Issei far beyond his limits, breaking down everything he thought he knew about strength and rebuilding him from the ground up. Every day, Ophis forced him to tap into the power of infinity, to feel its boundless nature. At first, Issei could barely handle it. The weight of it was crushing, overwhelming, like trying to contain an ocean inside a teacup. His body burned with exhaustion, his mind stretched to the breaking point. He would collapse, panting, sweat dripping down his face, only for Ophis to pull him back to his feet with a single glance. "Again," she would say, her voice devoid of emotion. And so, he would push himself further. Each time, he managed to hold on a little longer, to control a little more of the infinite power coursing through him. But with every ounce of strength he gained, he felt something slipping away. At first, it was subtle. He would find himself lost in the void, staring into the endless blackness, feeling disconnected. His thoughts, once so full of warmth and energy, began to dull, like a light slowly dimming. His mind would wander to thoughts of destruction, power, and control, things that had never mattered to him before. Then there were the nightmares. In one of those dreams, Issei found himself standing at the edge of a battlefield, surrounded by the ruins of what had once been Kuo Academy. The ground was scorched, the buildings shattered, and the sky overhead was filled with smoke. He stood alone, his body crackling with the power of infinity, and at his feet lay the bodies of those he loved. Rias, Akeno, Asia, all of them. Is this what you want? A voice asked, breaking the silence. Issei turned to see Akeno standing there, her face pale, her violet eyes wide with fear. Akeno, I didn't. Issei stammered, but the words felt hollow, distant. You've changed, Akeno whispered, stepping closer. Her usual playful demeanor was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar coldness. I don't recognize you anymore. Issei reached out for her, but his hand was trembling. I'm doing this to protect you. All of you. At what cost? She asked, her voice tinged with sorrow. Issei, the power you're chasing, it's not you. It's not who you are. Issei opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. He looked down at his hands, and for the first time, he noticed the dark, swirling energy that coated them, the power of infinity, twisting and writhing like a living thing. It was cold, empty, devoid of life. Akeno, I. Before he could finish, the ground beneath him shattered, and the void swallowed him whole. Issei awoke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. The void around him was silent once more, but the dream had left a lingering chill in his bones. His body ached from the relentless training, but it wasn't the physical pain that troubled him. It was the fear. The fear that Akeno's words had been true. Was he changing? Was this power really worth it? Ophis, who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward. Her gaze was as cold and empty as always. You hesitate, she said flatly. Issei wiped the sweat from his brow, his chest heaving with exhaustion. This power, it's more than I expected, he admitted, his voice strained. It feels wrong. Ophis tilted her head slightly. Infinity is neither good nor evil. It simply is. You're the one who assigns meaning to it. Issei frowned. That was the problem, wasn't it? The more he trained, the more he realized how vast and uncontrollable this power was. He wasn't sure if he was strong enough to wield it without losing himself in the process. But he had to try. For Rias. For Akeno. For Asia. I'm not giving up, Issei said, standing shakily to his feet. I'll keep going. Ophis nodded once, but there was no satisfaction in her gaze, no pride. She merely gestured for him to continue. And so he did. Days or perhaps weeks passed in the void, each one more grueling than the last. The training was merciless. Issei's body felt like it was being torn apart and rebuilt over and over again, pushing him far beyond the limits of what he had thought possible. But with each session, he felt himself growing stronger. He could feel the power of infinity coursing through him, becoming a part of him. It was intoxicating, a rush of energy that made him feel invincible. And yet, with every new surge of strength, the fear gnawed at him, whispering in the back of his mind. What if this power consumed him? What if he lost control? In another dream, Issei found himself back in Kuo Academy, but everything was distorted. The hallways stretched endlessly, the classrooms empty and cold. He wandered through the desolate halls until he reached the Orc Clubroom. Akeno was there, standing by the window, looking out into the darkness beyond. Her back was to him, but even from where he stood, Issei could sense the tension in her. Akeno. He called out, his voice soft, hesitant. She turned slowly, her violet eyes locking onto his. But instead of the warmth and mischief he had come to expect, there was only fear. Issei, she whispered, her voice trembling. You're scaring me. Issei's heart clenched. I don't want to scare you, he said, taking a step toward her. I'm doing this to protect you. To protect all of you. Akeno shook her head. This power, it's changing you. I can feel it. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch his hand, but the moment their skin made contact, a jolt of dark energy surged between them. Akeno flinched, pulling back as if she had been burned. I don't recognize you anymore, she said softly, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Issei looked down at his hands again, at the swirling chaotic energy that danced along his skin. The power of infinity. It was consuming him, wasn't it? Little by little, he was becoming something else, something darker. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't afford to. I have to do this, Issei whispered, more to himself than to her. I have to. Akeno's form began to fade, the dream dissolving around him. But her final words echoed in his mind long after she was gone. At what cost, Issei? Issei awoke once more in the void, the weight of Akeno's words heavy on his chest. The power of infinity pulsed through him, stronger than ever before, but so too did the fear. He looked up at Ophis, who stood silently before him, waiting for him to continue. Let's keep going, Issei said, clenching his fists. I'm not done yet. But even as he said the words, a small part of him wondered if he was already too far gone. The world snapped back into focus with a sudden, disorienting jolt. Issei blinked against the harsh light of the sun, the familiar sights and sounds of Kuo Town assaulting his senses all at once. It was overwhelming, too bright, too loud after the endless black void of Ophis's training realm. He stumbled slightly, his feet unsteady on the solid ground beneath him. The sensation of being back in the human world was surreal, almost foreign. The days or years, it was impossible to tell he had spent in the void, had warped his sense of reality. His body, once aching and exhausted from the constant training, now buzzed with an unfamiliar energy. The power of infinity still thrummed through his veins, restless and untamed. But there was no time to adjust. Ophis had sent him back for a reason. Guo Academy, Issei muttered, looking up at the skyline. The iconic clock tower of the school was just visible in the distance. Something was wrong, he could feel it. The air crackled with tension, and in the distance, a dark, swirling energy rose like a beacon of danger. His instinct screamed at him to move. Without a second thought, Issei dashed toward the source of the disturbance. He could feel the raw power within him, surging through his body, making his movements faster, more fluid than they had ever been before. He was no longer just Issei Haidu, the Red Dragon Emperor. He was something more, something infinite. As he approached the gates of Kuo Academy, he saw the source of the chaos, a group of rogue devils, their auras dark and malevolent, surrounding the courtyard. Their twisted smiles and glowing eyes made it clear they were here for trouble. Issei Haidu, one of the devils, sneered, stepping forward. So you've finally shown up. We heard you've gotten stronger, but you're still just a pawn, aren't you? Issei's eyes narrowed. Normally, he would have felt a flicker of fear or uncertainty, but now he felt nothing but the hum of power beneath his skin. His blood sang with the promise of destruction. He took a deep breath, the words of Ophis echoing in his mind. Infinity is neither good nor evil. It simply is. These devils, he knew he could crush them easily. The raw strength he possessed was almost intoxicating, and for a moment, a dark thrill ran through him at the thought of letting it loose. I suggest you leave, Issei said, his voice unnervingly calm. You don't want to fight me. The devil who had spoken earlier laughed, his companions joining in. Oh? And why's that? You think you can take all of us on by yourself? Issei didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand, focusing on the power inside him. A spark of infinity bloomed in his palm, a tiny, shimmering point of pure energy. The air around him seemed to distort, bending and warping, as the raw force of infinity began to bleed into the world. The devil's laughter died abruptly. What is that? One of them stammered, his eyes wide with fear. Issei didn't give them a chance to react. With a flick of his wrist, the point of infinity expanded, exploding outward in a wave of energy. The devils were thrown back, crashing into the ground and buildings with a force that left the earth trembling beneath them. He could feel the power now, roaring through him like a tidal wave. Every punch, every movement felt like it could tear the world apart. The air crackled with static as he launched himself at the nearest devil, his fist connecting with a sickening crunch. The devil went flying, crashing through a nearby wall. Issei didn't stop. His movements were too fast, too powerful for the devils to keep up with. Each strike was precise, calculated, and devastating. The devils tried to fight back, launching blasts of dark energy at him, but it was futile. Issei absorbed the attacks, the power of infinity, rendering their efforts meaningless. With every blow, he felt the exhilaration of his newfound strength, the thrill of being unstoppable. But at the same time, there was a nagging sensation at the back of his mind, something dark, something dangerous. He was losing control. The last devil stood trembling before him, blood dripping from his mouth as he raised his hand in a feeble attempt to defend himself. Issei towered over him, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light, his entire body radiating power. Please, the devil begged, his voice shaking. I surrender. Issei stared down at him, his heart pounding in his chest. The power of infinity surged within him, wild and untamed, begging to be unleashed. He could feel it pressing against the edges of his consciousness, whispering to him, urging him to finish the fight, to crush this weakling before him. One more blow. That's all it would take. His hand twitched, energy crackling in the air around him. The devil's eyes widened in terror, his body frozen in place. And then, suddenly, a voice cut through the haze in Issei's mind. Issei. He froze, the power faltering for a moment. The voice was soft, familiar. He turned his head slightly, his glowing eyes landing on a figure standing just a few feet away. It was Asia. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her green eyes filled with worry as she looked at him. Issei, please stop, she said, her voice trembling slightly. This isn't you. The words cut through the fog of power that clouded his mind. Issei blinked, the light in his eyes dimming as he looked down at the devil before him. The creature was broken, beaten, and terrified. What was he doing? Issei took a step back, the energy around him dissipating. The devil scrambled to his feet, casting one last fearful glance at Issei before turning and fleeing into the night. For a moment, there was silence. Issei stood there, his heart racing, the adrenaline still coursing through him. The power of infinity simmered beneath the surface, but it no longer felt overwhelming. He was in control again, barely. Asia approached him slowly, her expression softening as she reached out to touch his arm. Are you alright? She asked quietly. Issei opened his mouth to answer, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't alright. Not even close. He had come so close to losing control, to letting the power consume him. And for what? To prove he was strong? To protect those he cared about? Or was it something darker, something more primal? "I'm fine," he finally managed to say, though his voice lacked conviction. He glanced at Asia, her innocent eyes filled with concern, and he forced a smile. "Thanks for stopping me." Asia's hand lingered on his arm, her touch warm and comforting. But as she looked up at him, her expression shifted slightly, her brows furrowing in confusion. "Issei," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You feel different." Issei's heart skipped a beat. Different? What did she mean? Could she sense the change in him, the power that now coursed through his veins? Or was it something else, something deeper? He pulled away slightly, avoiding her gaze. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "Just the training." Asia didn't push further, but her eyes remained filled with worry. She stepped back, giving him space, though the weight of her unspoken concern hung between them. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the aftermath of the battle settling around them. The rogue devils were gone, the threat to Kuo Academy dealt with. But the real battle, the one inside Issei, was far from over. As they walked back toward the school, Issei couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. He had tested the power of infinity today, and while it had given him overwhelming strength, it had also shown him just how dangerous that strength could be. And as Asia walked beside him, her quiet presence a comfort he hadn't realized he needed, Issei couldn't help but wonder. Was he strong enough to wield this power without losing himself? Or was Ophis right, was infinity something beyond good and evil, a force that would eventually consume him? The quiet moments in the days following the battle with the rogue devils were deceptive. Kuo Academy resumed its normal pace, with students bustling through the halls, unaware of the growing storm brewing around Issei. For a brief time, he tried to settle back into his routine, attending classes, spending time with his friends, and pretending everything was fine. But deep inside, something was shifting. Every time he activated his boosted gear, the red gauntlet flared with an energy that felt foreign, more intense than ever before. The emerald jewel at its center flickered, pulsating erratically. It was subtle at first, but Issei felt it, the cracks in his control. It started small. His punches were too strong, his boosts multiplying faster than he could track. And then, during a sparring session with Kiba, it happened. "Boost!" Issei shouted, the familiar surge of energy flooding his body. But instead of the usual steady build-up, the power exploded outward like a torrent, a wild force that he couldn't contain. His fist, meant to land a light punch, sent Kiba flying across the training field, smashing him into the far wall with a force that left the building shaking. "Kiba?" Issei rushed to his friend's side, panic flaring in his chest. "Are you alright?" Kiba groaned, wincing as he pushed himself up. "I'm okay," he said, though his face was pale. "But that wasn't normal, Issei. What happened?" Issei looked down at his gauntlet, the red gleaming with an unnatural glow. His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what had happened, but he could feel that the power was slipping out of his control, piece by piece. At night, as he lay in bed, trying and failing to sleep, a voice echoed in his mind. "You're losing control, partner." It was Drag, his ever-watchful dragon companion. Issei sat up, his heart racing. He had felt the unease building within him, but hearing Drag voice it out loud made the fear real. "I know," Issei admitted, his voice a whisper in the darkness. "Something's wrong with me. The power, it's not what it used to be." Drag's deep voice rumbled through Issei's mind, heavy with concern. "This is not the power you are familiar with. The power of infinity is changing you. You've noticed, haven't you?" Issei clenched his fists. "I thought it was just part of getting stronger, but now, I don't know. I didn't expect this." "That's because infinity is not meant to be wielded so carelessly. It is boundless, impossible to contain within a human vessel." Drake's voice softened slightly. "Ophis is a being of pure infinity. You're not." Issei lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Drake's words hung heavy in the air, and Issei felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Was he truly losing control? Was the power that had promised to make him stronger also pushing him toward destruction? He was snapped out of his thoughts by a knock on his door. Sitting up quickly, Issei called out, "Come in." The door creaked open, and Ria stepped inside. Her expression was unreadable, her crimson hair flowing over her shoulders like a river of fire. She closed the door behind her and stood there, her sapphire eyes locked on Issei. "Riaz?" Issei asked, confused by her sudden visit. "Is everything alright?" Riaz crossed the room, standing at the edge of his bed. Her usual air of confidence was replaced with something else, concern, and something deeper that Issei couldn't quite place. "Issei," she began softly, her voice low, "you've been distant. I can feel it. And so can the others." Issei blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I've been here, with you all. I'm fine." No, you're not, Ria said, shaking her head. Something is happening to you. You've been acting strange ever since you started training with Ophis. Your power, it's different. And so are you. Her words struck him like a blow, and for a moment, Issei didn't know how to respond. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that everything was fine, but the truth was she was right. I'm stronger now, Issei said quietly. That's what matters, isn't it? I can protect you all. Riaz took a step closer, her eyes searching his face. Issei, I don't care about how strong you are. I care about you. And right now, I feel like I'm losing you. Her words sent a chill through him. He had never heard her speak like this before, so vulnerable, so raw. His heart clenched as he realized just how much his actions were affecting those around him. Ria's hand reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek. You don't have to do this alone, she whispered. I'm here. We're all here. But you need to talk to us, to let us in. Let me in. Issei felt the warmth of her touch, but it was distant, like he was wrapped in a fog. The power of infinity surged inside him, a cold, relentless force, and for the first time, he felt something dark stir within him, something that whispered to push her away, to distance himself from those who made him vulnerable. Ria's Issei started, but his voice trailed off. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to reach out to her, to tell her everything, but the words stuck in his throat. Seeing his hesitation, Ria's eyes filled with sadness. Please, Issei. Don't let this power change you. But as her words lingered in the air, Issei felt something snap inside him, a cold attachment that took hold of his heart. He gently pulled away from her touch, standing from the bed and turning his back to her. I need to get stronger, he said, his voice hollow. That's the only way I can protect you. I can't stop now. Ria's breath hitched, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Is that all you care about? Power. What about us? What about me? Issei closed his eyes, guilt gnawing at him, but he couldn't stop himself. The power of infinity was pulling him in, and every day it felt harder to resist. I'm sorry, he whispered. The silence that followed was unbearable. Issei could feel the weight of Ria's pain, her unspoken words hanging in the air between them. And then, without another word, she turned and left the room, the door closing softly behind her. Later that night, as the moon hung high in the sky, Ophis appeared once again. She stood at the edge of Issei's window, her presence as cold and unfeeling as ever. You're struggling, she observed, her voice a quiet monotone. Issei didn't turn to face her. I don't know what's happening to me, he admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The power, it's changing me, isn't it? Ophis's expression didn't waver. The power of infinity is boundless. It is raw, untamed. It will bend you to its will if you let it. Issei clenched his fists. I don't want to lose myself. But every day, I feel it slipping away. For the first time, Ophis's gaze softened, ever so slightly. She stepped closer to him, her pale hand reaching out to touch his shoulder. Infinity is not meant to be controlled. It is meant to be embraced. Embraced. Issei repeated, his heart heavy with doubt. But what if it destroys me? Destruction and creation are two sides of the same coin, Ophis said softly. To wield infinity is to accept both. Her words echoed in his mind, and for a moment, Issei felt the weight of his choices. He had sought out this power to protect those he loved, but in doing so, had he become something else? Something destructive. Ophis's hand lingered on his shoulder, her touch cold but strangely comforting. You are strong, Issei. But strength comes at a cost. Issei's mind flashed to Ria's, to the pain in her eyes when she had confronted him. Was this the cost of his power? Pushing away the people he cared about, losing himself in the process. He looked up at Ophis, his voice trembling with uncertainty. And if I can't pay that cost? Ophis's gaze remained steady. Then you will fall. Issei swallowed hard, the truth of her words sinking in. The power of infinity was a double-edged sword, one that could save or destroy him, depending on how he wielded it. And right now, he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to bear that burden. As Ophis faded into the night, Issei stood alone in the darkness, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. Was this the path he had chosen? Or had it chosen him? The whispers began almost immediately after Issei's return to Kuo Academy. Word of his newfound strength had spread like wildfire, carried by rumors and half-truths, but the undeniable fact was this. Issei Haidu had grown into a force to be reckoned with. Even among the supernatural, strength like his did not go unnoticed. It started with the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Conversations between devils, fallen angels, and even the angels themselves grew hushed when Issei entered the room. Eyes followed him wherever he went, and he could feel the weight of their judgment, their fear, their curiosity. But it wasn't just that, there was something else, something darker lurking beneath the surface. One afternoon, as Issei made his way through the school corridors, he caught a glimpse of a figure waiting in the shadows near the old school building. There was something unnerving about the way they watched him, too still, too silent. The voice from behind startled him. You've attracted a lot of attention, Issei. Issei turned, seeing Akeno standing there with a soft smile on her lips, but her eyes carried a flicker of concern. She stepped closer, her familiar scent and presence soothing his frayed nerves. Yeah, I've noticed, Issei replied, forcing a grin. Guess getting stronger has its downsides. Akeno's smile softened as she placed a hand on his arm. It's more than that. Your power has changed, and others are starting to see it. Be careful, Issei. There are those who might want to use you. Her words lingered, making him uneasy, but before he could respond, the figure in the shadows emerged, stepping into the light. A tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes strode confidently toward them, his smile cold and calculated. "Hi do Issei," the man said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "A word, if I may." Issei tensed, instinctively stepping in front of Akeno. "Who are you?" The man's smile widened. "Ah, where are my manners? I am Azazel, leader of the fallen angels." Issei blinked, his mind racing. He had heard of Azazel before, a powerful figure in the supernatural world, cunning and dangerous. His presence here, now, could only mean trouble. Azazel's eyes flicked toward Akeno for a moment before settling back on Issei. "I've heard of your recent growth. Quite impressive for a devil still so young." "Thanks, I guess," Issei muttered, his guard up. Azazel chuckled. "You see, power like yours doesn't go unnoticed. I'm sure you've realized that by now. But the devils, the angels, they'll only limit you. They'll keep you in chains, bound by their rules, their agendas." Issei's jaw tightened. "What's your point?" "My point," Azazel continued, stepping closer, "is that you don't have to be confined by their expectations. With your strength, you could be something more. Something free. Join us, Issei. The fallen angels offer you a place among equals, where your power can be used for its true purpose." Issei's mind whirled. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to tempt him with promises of power, but something about Azazel's words struck deeper. The idea of freedom, of not being tied down by the rules of devils or angels, was appealing. And with his growing strength, he had felt the limitations imposed on him by his current role. His power demanded more. "I'm not interested," Issei said firmly, though he could feel the nagging doubt creeping in. Azazel's smile didn't waver. "Think about it. What do the devils truly offer you? Loyalty. Power. They're using you, Issei. You're a pawn in their game, just like the rest of them. But with us, you could be something more, something greater." Before Issei could respond, a cold voice interrupted them. "Leave." Ophis appeared without warning, her presence commanding and absolute. Azazel's smile faltered slightly, but he didn't lose his composure. "Ophis," he greeted her with a nod. "I didn't expect to see you here." "You will not take him," Ophis said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "He is mine." The possessiveness in her voice was unsettling, and for a brief moment, Issei felt like he was caught between two predators. Azazel, however, merely smirked. "Of course," he said smoothly, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'm merely offering him a choice. After all, isn't freedom what we all seek?" With that, Azazel turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows once more. The tension in the air lingered long after he was gone, and Issei let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You should not listen to him," Ophis said quietly, her eyes still fixed on the spot where Azazel had vanished. Issei turned to her, frowning. "Why does it matter? You've been telling me the same thing, that the power of infinity is beyond good or evil. What's wrong with a little freedom?" Ophis's gaze flickered, something unreadable passing through her expression. "Power without control is destruction. Azazel would lead you down a path of ruin." Issei clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. "And what about you, Ophis? You're using me too, aren't you? Training me to wield this power for your own reasons. How is that any different?" Ophis stepped closer, her cold aura pressing against him. "I am showing you the truth of infinity. The others seek to bend you to their will. I do not." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Issei wasn't sure what to believe anymore. He had always trusted Riaz and his friends, but lately, the lines between right and wrong had blurred. The power of infinity had changed everything, and with it, the temptations for more power, more freedom had begun to gnaw at him. Later that evening, Issei found himself on the roof of the academy, the cool night breeze brushing against his skin. The stars above twinkled faintly, distant and unreachable. He closed his eyes, trying to clear his mind, but the conversation with Azazel kept replaying in his head. Freedom. Power. Control. He heard the soft footsteps approaching and opened his eyes to see Akeno standing there, her silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice gentle. Issei smiled slightly, gesturing for her to sit beside him. Akeno settled down next to him, her long black hair fluttering in the breeze. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. "You've been quiet lately," Akeno said softly. "More than usual." Issei sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've just had a lot on my mind." Akeno glanced at him, her eyes soft and understanding. Azazel's offer. Yeah, Issei admitted. He made it sound so tempting. Freedom, power, everything without the rules or restrictions. It's hard not to think about it. Akeno reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm in a comforting gesture. It's natural to want more, Issei. But remember why you fight. You're not just fighting for power or for yourself. You fight to protect the people you love. Her words struck a chord deep within him. He thought of Ria's, of Asia, of all the friends who had stood by him, and the weight of his decisions suddenly felt heavier. But as much as he wanted to protect them, the allure of the power he now possessed was undeniable. I don't want to lose myself, Issei said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. But every day, it feels like I'm slipping further away. Akeno's hand tightened on his arm, and when he looked at her, he saw the worry in her eyes. You won't lose yourself, she whispered. Not as long as you have us. Not as long as you have me. Issei's heart skipped a beat. There was something different in her tone, something deeper than just concern. He had always been close to Akeno, but this moment felt different. More intimate. The warmth of her hand on his arm, the softness in her voice, it was comforting, grounding him in a way that nothing else could. He turned to her, meeting her gaze. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down, the tension between them palpable. Akeno's lips parted slightly, as if she was about to say something, but before she could speak, a cold voice interrupted the moment. He is mine. Ophis' voice cut through the night like ice, her figure appearing at the edge of the roof. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something possessive in her gaze as she looked at Akeno, then at Issei. Akeno stiffened slightly, her grip on Issei's arm loosening. Ophis. Ophis' eyes narrowed. You will not interfere. Issei felt the tension between them like a knife in the air. Ophis' possessiveness was unsettling, and for the first time, he realized just how deeply she viewed him as something more than just a student or warrior. He stood up, placing himself between Akeno and Ophis. Ophis, stop. Ophis' gaze flicked to him, cold and unyielding. You do not understand the path you walk, Issei. Maybe not, he said, his voice steady. But I'm not going to let anyone control me, not you, not Azazel, not anyone. Ophis' expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something anger, perhaps before she vanished into the night. Issei let out a breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The temptation of power, the pressure from all sides, it was overwhelming. But as he turned to Akeno, seeing the warmth and concern in her eyes, he knew that no matter how difficult the path ahead was, he wasn't walking it alone. The night sky over Kuo Academy had turned a deep shade of crimson, the air heavy with tension and the scent of impending battle. Issei stood at the edge of the battlefield, his body humming with the raw energy of infinity coursing through him. In front of him, another group of rogue devils gathered, their eyes gleaming with malice, their dark power crackling like static in the air. This wasn't supposed to happen. The rogue devils had appeared without warning, wreaking havoc on the city, and Issei had been thrust into battle with little time to think. His friends Rias, Akeno, Kiba, Asia were fighting alongside him, but the enemy was relentless. And Issei's power was growing unstable. Issei. Ria's voice cut through the noise of battle as she shot a blast of destruction magic at one of the devils. We need to push them back. They're too strong to take down one by one. Issei nodded, his heart pounding. His boosted gear glowed a brilliant red, the emerald jewel shining with power, but it was the infinity inside him, the limitless energy Ophis had awakened, that felt more dangerous, more volatile. He could feel it beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. The devils charged, and Issei raised his fist, his eyes burning with determination. He could do this. He had the strength now. He would protect them. But as the devils drew closer, the power surged inside him, overwhelming his senses. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he couldn't control it. His mind blurred, and the next thing he knew, he had activated the full force of infinity. Boost. The word echoed in the air, but this time, it wasn't just the usual amplification of his strength. The infinity within him erupted, a blinding wave of raw energy exploding from his body. The air around him rippled and warped as the sheer magnitude of power radiated outward, tearing through everything in its path. The first wave hit the devils, and they were obliterated in an instant, turned to ash before they could even scream. But the energy didn't stop there. It continued to expand, engulfing the surrounding area. Buildings crumbled, trees disintegrated, and the ground beneath Issei's feet fractured, the earth splitting apart as if it couldn't withstand the force of infinity. Issei's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. No. I didn't mean to. But it was too late. The power had already been unleashed, and it was beyond his control. Rias, Akeno, and the others had been thrown back by the shockwave, struggling to regain their footing as the destruction spread. The once peaceful courtyard of Kuo Academy was now a wasteland, the air thick with dust and the remnants of Issei's uncontrollable power. Issei stood in the center of it all, his chest heaving, his body trembling from the aftermath. The boosted gear's glow flickered erratically, as though even it couldn't handle the sheer force of what had just happened. His hands shook, his heart racing as the reality of the destruction sank in. What had he done? The cold voice broke through the haze. This is the power of infinity, Issei. Ophis appeared beside him, her expression as unreadable as ever. She looked out at the devastation with an air of indifference, as if the destruction meant nothing to her. Issei turned to her, his voice hoarse with panic. I didn't mean to do this. I didn't want to destroy everything. Ophis tilted her head slightly. Infinity cannot be controlled in the way you wish. It is boundless. You wielded it, and this is the result. Issei's heart dropped. He had unleashed something far beyond his comprehension, and the consequences were catastrophic. The rogue devils were gone, but so was everything else: the courtyard, the school grounds, the trees that had once shaded the area, all reduced to rubble. This wasn't what he wanted. This wasn't power. This was chaos. He collapsed to his knees, staring at his hands as they trembled. The power still thrummed inside him, wild and unchecked, and it terrified him. He had thought he could handle it, thought that with Ophis's training, he could control infinity. But now, he wasn't so sure. I'm a monster, Issei whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the crumbling earth around him. The soft familiar voice called out to him through the destruction. Issei. Issei looked up, his heart clenching as he saw Asia running toward him, her eyes wide with shock and fear. She stumbled over the broken ground, but her gaze was fixed on him, her expression filled with concern. Issei, are you alright? Asia reached his side, her hand gently touching his shoulder, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold emptiness he felt inside. Issei recoiled instinctively, pulling away from her touch. Don't come near me, Asia. Asia's eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Why? What's wrong? Issei's voice cracked. He looked down at the destruction around them, the chaos he had caused, and then back at her. I can't control it. This power, it's too much. I could hurt you. I could destroy everything. Asia knelt beside him, her green eyes soft with understanding. Issei, you would never hurt me. I know that. Issei shook his head, his heart pounding in his chest. You don't understand, Asia. I can't stop it. The power is too strong, and I'm not strong enough to control it. I don't want to lose you. Tears welled up in Asia's eyes, but she didn't flinch. You won't lose me. I believe in you, Issei. You're not alone. Her words cut through the fear and chaos whirling inside him, but even as she spoke, Issei could feel the power of infinity tugging at him, pulling him toward a darkness he couldn't escape. The warmth of Asia's hand on his shoulder was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough to drown out the fear that gripped his heart. I'm afraid, Issei admitted, his voice breaking. I'm afraid of what I'll become. Asia's hand tightened on his shoulder, her voice gentle but firm. You're not alone, Issei. We're all here for you. We'll help you find a way to control it. But even as she spoke, Issei felt the growing distance between them. It wasn't her fault she was trying to reach him, trying to pull him back from the brink. But the power inside him was something she couldn't touch, something even he couldn't fully understand. And the fear of hurting her, of hurting anyone he cared about, was too great. He stood up abruptly, stepping away from her. I can't be around you right now, Asia. Her eyes widened in shock. What? Why? Because I don't trust myself, Issei said, his voice low and filled with pain. I don't know what I'll do if I lose control again. I can't risk it. Asia took a step forward, her voice trembling. Issei, please. I'm sorry, he cut her off, his chest tight with guilt. I need to figure this out. Alone. He turned and walked away, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a crushing force. Asia's soft sobs reached his ears, but he forced himself not to look back. He had already caused too much destruction, too much pain. And until he could control the power inside him, he couldn't risk being around the people he cared about. As he disappeared into the night, leaving behind the wreckage of the battle, Ophis watched him with cold, calculating eyes. To her, this was merely a step in his journey, a necessary test of his strength and will. The destruction, the chaos, it was all part of the process. But to Issei, it felt like the beginning of the end. The cold, empty silence of the abandoned warehouse pressed in on Issei like a suffocating weight. Days had passed since the incident at Kuo Academy, but the images of destruction still haunted his every waking moment. The sight of the school courtyard in ruins, the buildings crumbling, and the faces of his friends shocked, scared wouldn't leave his mind. He had destroyed everything he was supposed to protect. Issei had isolated himself in this desolate place, far from anyone he could hurt. The power of infinity still surged within him, relentless and uncontrollable. The thought of losing control again, of causing more harm, terrified him. He couldn't risk being around anyone, not Riaz, not Akeno, not Asia. Especially not Asia. Her tearful face when he had pulled away from her haunted him the most. He had seen the pain in her eyes, the confusion, but he couldn't explain it to her. How could he tell her that he feared the very power that was meant to make him strong enough to protect her? That instead of saving her, he could destroy her. No. It was better this way. Better to be alone. He sat on the cold, hard floor, staring at his hands. The boosted gear was silent for now, its red glow dim, but Issei knew it was still there, waiting. The power of infinity hummed in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of the chaos lurking beneath the surface. "You are afraid," Ophis' voice cut through the silence, and Issei didn't flinch. He was used to her appearing out of nowhere by now. Ophis stepped into the dim light of the warehouse, her cold, unblinking gaze fixed on him. Her presence was as eerie as ever, a constant reminder of the source of his power. "You should not fear infinity," she said, her voice as emotionless as ever. "It is boundless. It is power. To fear it is to reject what you have become." Issei clenched his fists. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to become whatever this is." "You wanted power," Ophis replied, her tone unyielding. "I gave it to you." "Yeah, well, it's not worth it if it means I can't control it." Issei's voice wavered with frustration. "What's the point of power if all I do is hurt the people I care about?" Ophis stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You misunderstand. Infinity is not about control. It is about acceptance. You are fighting it, resisting it. That is why you struggle." "Acceptance?" Issei scoffed, shaking his head. "You want me to just accept that I'm a walking disaster waiting to happen? That I might hurt Rias, Akeno, Asia, everyone I love?" Ophis stepped closer, her voice a soft chilling whisper. "You cling to your human attachments. Love, friendship, fear. These are the chains that bind you. If you truly embraced infinity, you would be free." Issei's heart pounded in his chest. Her words were tempting, pulling at something deep inside him. The idea of being free from the fear of hurting his friends, free from the guilt was alluring. But at what cost? He looked at Ophis, her cold, empty gaze reflecting none of the warmth or care he had known from his friends. She spoke of freedom, but the price seemed too high. Could he really let go of the people he loved for the sake of power? Before he could respond, the door to the warehouse creaked open, and a familiar voice called out to him. "Issei." Rias stepped into the warehouse, her eyes scanning the dark space until they landed on him. She was breathless, her crimson hair slightly disheveled from running, but her expression was resolute. Behind her, Akeno and Asia followed, their faces filled with a mixture of worry and determination. Issei's heart sank. He had hoped they wouldn't find him. He had isolated himself for a reason. He didn't want them to see him like this, broken, consumed by doubt and fear. Rias approached him, her eyes never leaving his. "You can't keep running from us, Issei." "I'm not running," Issei muttered, looking away. "I'm protecting you." "Protecting us?" Ria's voice was sharp, but there was a tenderness in it too. "Is that what you think this is? Isolating yourself, pushing us away, you think that's protecting us? You don't understand." Issei snapped, his voice rising. "I almost destroyed everything back there. I don't know how to control this power. I don't want to hurt you." Ria's expression softened, and she knelt down in front of him, her hand gently resting on his. "Issei, we're not afraid of you. We're afraid for you." Akeno stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "You've always been the one protecting us, Issei. But you don't have to do it alone." Asia, her eyes filled with tears, nodded. "We care about you, Issei. You're not a monster." Issei's chest tightened, his heart torn between the fear of what he might become and the overwhelming love and support from the people who stood before him. How could they still care about him after everything? After the destruction he had caused? "I can't control it," Issei whispered, his voice breaking. "The power, it's too much." Ria's hand squeezed his gently, her eyes soft and filled with love. "Then let us help you." Issei looked up at her, his vision blurred with tears. The weight of his isolation, his fear, his guilt, it all came crashing down around him. But as he stared into Ria's eyes, he felt something shift inside him. The darkness, the chaos, the pull of infinity, it was still there, but so was something else. Love. He had spent so long fighting against the power inside him, trying to control it, that he had forgotten the reason he had sought that power in the first place. It wasn't for destruction. It wasn't for freedom. It was for them, for the people he loved. "I'm scared," Issei admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Rias leaned in closer, her forehead resting gently against his. "I know. But you're not alone. We'll face this together." Issei's breath hitched, his heart pounding in his chest. The warmth of Ria's touch, the softness of her voice, it was grounding, pulling him back from the edge. He could feel the power of infinity simmering beneath the surface, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt manageable. Rias pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his. "I love you, Issei," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "No matter what happens, no matter how powerful you become, that will never change." Issei's heart swelled with emotion, the fear and doubt that had plagued him slowly beginning to fade. He reached up, his hand gently cupping Ria's cheek, his thumb brushing against her soft skin. I love you too, he whispered, his voice filled with sincerity. For a moment, everything else fell away. The chaos, the power, the destruction, it all seemed distant, insignificant in the face of the love he felt for the people around him. Riaz, Akeno, Asia, they weren't just his friends or allies. They were his family, and they were worth fighting for. Ophis, who had been silent until now, watched the exchange with a cold, detached expression. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the intimacy of the moment. Love is a weakness, Issei, she said, her tone emotionless. It will hold you back. Infinity is beyond such things. Issei stood, pulling away from Riaz, but this time, there was no hesitation in his voice. No, Ophis. Love isn't a weakness. It's what gives me the strength to keep going. Ophis's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. Issei turned back to Riaz, Akeno, and Asia, and newfound determination in his heart. He didn't know how he would control the power of infinity, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone. And as long as he had them by his side, he would find a way. Together, they would face whatever came next. The gentle glow of dawn seeped through the curtains of Issei's room, casting soft shadows across the floor. For the first time in what felt like ages, he slept peacefully, free from the nightmares that had plagued him since embracing the power of infinity. The events of the previous night, the confrontation with his friends, the reaffirmation of their support had lifted a heavy burden from his heart. Inside his mind, a familiar presence stirred. It's time we talked, partner, Drake's deep voice resonated within Issei's consciousness. Issei opened his eyes slowly, a sense of calm washing over him. Drake, he whispered, sitting up. I was wondering when you'd speak up again. I've been observing, the dragon replied. You've been through a tumultuous journey, and I wanted to give you space. But now, we need to address the path you're on. Issei nodded, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. I know. Things have gotten complicated. Suddenly, the world around him faded, and Issei found himself standing in a vast, ethereal landscape, a mental plane where he and Drake could converse freely. The sky above was a swirling tapestry of reds and golds, and beneath his feet lay an endless expanse of crystalline water, reflecting the cosmos above. Drake materialized before him, the massive red dragon emperor towering over Issei with scales shimmering like molten fire. His emerald eyes bore into Issei's, a mixture of concern and determination evident in their depths. The power of infinity is not something to be taken lightly, Drake began. Ophis may have given you a fragment of her power, but it comes at a great cost. Issei sighed, meeting the dragon's gaze. I thought I could handle it. I wanted to protect everyone, to be strong enough so that no one would get hurt because of me. And yet, in trying to protect them, you've distanced yourself from the very people you care about, Drake observed. You've allowed the allure of power to overshadow your humanity. Issei looked down at his reflection in the water below. I know. I've made mistakes. But I don't want to lose myself, Drake. I don't want to become a monster. The dragon's expression softened. That's why I'm here, partner. To remind you of who you are. You're Issei Haidu, a devil, yes, but also a human with a heart capable of great love and compassion. It's that humanity that gives you strength, not just the power you wield. Issei clenched his fists, a newfound resolve building within him. You're right. I've been so focused on controlling the infinity that I forgot why I wanted power in the first place. It's not about being the strongest, it's about protecting those I love. A ripple spread across the water as another presence made itself known. Ophis emerged from the shadows, her form seemingly gliding over the surface without disturbing it. Her eyes remained impassive, but there was a subtle tension in the air. Drake, she acknowledged curtly. Ophis, Drake responded, a hint of a growl in his voice. We need to discuss Issei's future. Ophis tilted her head slightly. Issei has embraced infinity. There is nothing more to discuss. Issei stepped forward. No, Ophis. I haven't fully embraced it, and I don't think I want to, not if it means losing who I am. Her gaze shifted to him, unblinking. Infinity requires complete acceptance. Doubt weakens you. Maybe, Issei conceded. But I believe there's a way to balance it, to use the power you've given me without letting it consume me. Drake nodded in agreement. He doesn't need to abandon his humanity to wield great power. It's his connections, his emotions, that make him truly formidable. Ophis's expression remained unreadable. Emotions are fleeting. Power is eternal. Emotions are what make life worth living, Issei countered. I won't sacrifice my relationships, my feelings, just for the sake of more power. That's not who I am. There was a moment of silence as Ophis regarded him. You would limit yourself. I prefer to think of it as grounding myself, Issei replied firmly. I appreciate what you've done for me, Ophis, but I need to find my own path, a path that doesn't involve losing myself. Drake's chest swelled with pride. Well said, partner. Ophis seemed to consider his words. Very well. The power is yours to wield as you see fit. But know that without complete acceptance, you will never unlock its full potential. I can live with that, Issei said with a small smile. I'd rather be half as strong and still be myself than lose everything that makes me who I am. Ophis gave a slight nod. Our agreement is concluded then. As she began to fade from the mental plane, Issei called out to her. Wait. She paused, her form wavering. Yes. Thank you, he said sincerely. For everything. I know we don't see eye to eye, but you've helped me realize what's important. Ophis's eyes softened just a fraction. Farewell Issei Haidu. But that, she vanished, leaving Issei and Dreg alone once more. You handled that well, Dreg remarked. Issei let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I wasn't sure how she'd react. Ophis is an enigma, but even she can understand resolve when she sees it. Issei looked up at the swirling sky. So, where do we go from here? We move forward, Dreg said confidently. Together. I'll help you learn to control the power you have, to integrate it with your own without losing yourself. A sense of relief washed over Issei. Thanks Dreg. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd manage, the dragon teased lightly. But perhaps with a bit less flair. Issei chuckled, the weight on his shoulders feeling lighter than it had in weeks. Back in the real world, Issei opened his eyes to find the sun fully risen, casting a warm glow across his room. He stretched, feeling more at peace than he had in a long time. A soft knock at his door drew his attention. Issei, are you awake? Asia's gentle voice called from the hallway. Yeah, come in, he replied. The door creaked open, and Asia stepped inside, a tray with breakfast balanced in her hands. I thought you might be hungry. Issei smiled warmly. Thanks Asia. You didn't have to do that. She placed the tray on his desk, her cheeks tinged with a light blush. It's no trouble. I wanted to make sure you're taking care of yourself. He stood up and walked over to her. I appreciate it. Really. They sat together as Issei began to eat. Asia watched him quietly for a moment before speaking. You seem different today, she observed. Different how? She tilted her head thoughtfully. More at ease. Happier. Issei nodded. I had a talk with Dreg and Ophis, actually. I think I'm starting to figure things out. Asia's eyes brightened. That's wonderful. I was so worried about you. He reached out and gently took her hand. I'm sorry for making you worry. I was so caught up in my own struggles that I didn't consider how it was affecting all of you. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. We're your friends, Issei. We want to help you, just like you've always been there for us. The comfortable silence settled between them. Issei found himself looking into Asia's emerald eyes, a softness there that warmed his heart. Asia, he began hesitantly, I don't think I've properly thanked you for everything. She looked down shyly. You don't have to thank me. I'm happy just being by your side. He felt a flush rise to his cheeks. Still, I want you to know how much you mean to me. You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Asia glanced up, her gaze meeting his. Because I know the kind of person you are, kind, brave, and always thinking of others. Issei's heart skipped a beat. You give me too much credit. She shook her head, smiling softly. No, I don't think I do. For a moment, they simply sat there, hands still joined. The morning light bathed them in a gentle glow, and Issei felt a sense of contentment he hadn't experienced in a long time. Asia, he said quietly, A sudden knock at the door interrupted the moment. Hey Issei. You up? It was Mitsuda's voice, boisterous as ever. Issei chuckled awkwardly, releasing Asia's hand. Yeah, I'm up. Asia stood, her cheeks pink. I should let you get ready. I'll see you later. Definitely, he replied with a smile. As she left the room, Issei couldn't help but feel that something had shifted between them, a subtle change that hinted at possibilities he hadn't considered before. The rest of the day passed with a newfound sense of normalcy. Issei rejoined his friends, attending classes and even participating in club activities without the overwhelming burden of his internal struggles. During a break, Riaz approached him, her eyes reflecting both curiosity and relief. You seem to be in better spirits. He nodded. I had a talk with Dreg and made some decisions about how I want to handle things moving forward. She smiled warmly. I'm glad to hear that. We were all worried about you. Thanks for not giving up on me, he said sincerely. Never, Riaz replied firmly. You're an important part of our family. Bekeno joined them, a teasing glint in her eyes. Group hug. Issei laughed. Maybe later. They spent the afternoon together, the camaraderie and light-hearted banter reminding Issei of all the reasons he cherished these relationships. The darkness that had threatened to consume him seemed distant now, replaced by hope and determination. As the sun began to set, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Issei found himself standing on the school's rooftop. The cool breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and the horizon stretched out before him, full of endless possibilities. Feeling better? Dreg's voice echoed in his mind. Much, Issei replied. I know there's still a lot to figure out, but I think I'm on the right path. We'll face whatever comes next together. You, me, and all your friends." Issei smiled. "Sounds like a plan." He took a deep breath, the weight of his past fears lifting. With his humanity reaffirmed and the support of those he loved, he felt ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead, including his complicated relationship with Ophis and the power of infinity. For now, though, he allowed himself to simply be, to enjoy the moment and the connections that made life meaningful. The night sky over Kuo town was clear, the stars shimmering like distant beacons against the inky black canvas. A full moon hung low on the horizon, casting a soft glow over the quiet streets. But beneath the surface of this tranquil scene, tension crackled like electricity in the air. Issei knew the time had come. He stood on the outskirts of town, away from the eyes of his friends and allies, in a secluded forest clearing. The air here was still, unnaturally so, and the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the confrontation that was about to unfold. Ophis stood before him, her expression as cold and unreadable as ever. The infinite dragon god had no need for words to convey her power. Her very presence was enough to make the world around her feel small, insignificant. Yet, despite her aura of indifference, Issei could sense that she had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to make a decision. Issei took a deep breath, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. His heart was heavy with uncertainty, but there was no turning back now. "Ophis," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him, "we need to talk." She regarded him with her usual emotionless stare. "You seek clarity." Issei nodded. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about infinity and what it means to wield it. And I realized something. I don't want to lose myself in this power. I can't." Ophis remained silent, her gaze unwavering. Issei continued, his voice growing stronger. "I appreciate everything you've done for me. You gave me the strength I needed when I thought I couldn't protect anyone. But now, I have to make a choice. Either you help me control this power without losing who I am, or I walk away from it forever." The air around them seemed to shift, growing colder, heavier. Ophis's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in her expression: disappointment. Anger. Issei couldn't be sure. "You misunderstand the nature of infinity," Ophis said, her voice a low, emotionless murmur. "Infinity cannot be controlled in the way you desire. It is boundless. To wield it fully, you must embrace it entirely. There is no compromise." Issei clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You keep saying that. But I've seen what happens when I lose control. I nearly destroyed everything I care about. I'm not willing to sacrifice my humanity for power. There has to be another way." Ophis took a step closer, her gaze piercing through him like a dagger. "You are weak because you cling to your humanity. Emotions, attachments, these things limit you. Infinity is beyond such things. If you wish to wield it, you must sever those ties." Issei's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected this, but hearing it so plainly made the decision all the more real. He had spent weeks battling with this very choice: power or humanity. Now, it was time to face the consequences of his decision. Ophis's voice grew softer, yet more intense. "You have tasted infinity, Issei Haidu. You have seen its potential. I offer you the chance to embrace it fully. You will become unstoppable, unbound by the limits of mortality. Or, you may walk away and return to your fragile existence, forever limited by your emotions and fears. Choose." The ultimatum hung in the air like a blade, and for a moment, Issei felt the full weight of it pressing down on him. Ultimate power at the cost of everything that made him who he was, or walk away and accept his limitations, possibly forever. But before Issei could respond, a familiar voice rang out from the shadows. "Issei." The kendo emerged from the trees, her breath ragged, as if she had been running to catch up with him. Her violet eyes were wide with fear, but also something more: desperation. Issei's heart skipped a beat. "Akeno. What are you doing here?" She ignored his question, her gaze shifting between him and Ophis, a mixture of anger and panic flashing across her face. "Issei, don't do this," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Don't let her take you away from us." Ophis's gaze turned to Akeno, her expression as unreadable as ever. "This is not your concern." But Akeno stepped forward, her eyes locking onto Issei's. "It is my concern. You think you're protecting us by doing this, but you're not. You're pushing us away. You're pushing me away." Issei swallowed hard, the emotion swirling inside him becoming more intense with every passing second. "Akeno, I..." She closed the distance between them, her voice cracking as she spoke. "I can't lose you, Issei. Not to this. I've seen the way this power is changing you, and it scares me. It's like you're disappearing, little by little, and I'm afraid that one day, you'll be gone forever." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on his own struggle, on the weight of the power he wielded, that he hadn't realized how much his actions had affected the people around him. Akeno's fear, her desperation, it was all because she didn't want to lose him. Akeno's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she placed her hands on his chest. Please, Issei. Don't do this. You're stronger than you think, strong enough to protect us without sacrificing who you are. I love you just the way you are, and I don't want to lose the man I love to some cold, empty power. Issei's breath hitched. The raw emotion in her voice, the vulnerability she was showing it, cut through the fog of doubt and fear that had clouded his mind for so long. I love you too, Akeno, Issei whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. I've been so afraid of losing control, of failing to protect everyone, that I forgot why I wanted this power in the first place. Akeno smiled through her tears. Then don't let her take you away from us. You don't need infinity to be a hero, Issei. You already are one. Ophis, who had been watching the exchange in silence, spoke once more, her tone unchanging. Emotions weaken you, Issei Haidu. They make you vulnerable. If you choose this path, you will never unlock the true power of infinity. Issei turned to face her, his expression resolute. Maybe that's true. Maybe I'll never be as powerful as I could be if I embrace infinity. But that's a price I'm willing to pay. My humanity, my emotions, my love for my friends, that's what makes me who I am. I'd rather be weak and stay true to myself than lose everything that matters to me. The air between them seemed too still, the tension palpable as Ophis regarded him with her cold, calculating gaze. For a long moment, there was silence, and Issei wondered if she would simply take the power away, if she would punish him for his decision. But Ophis simply nodded, ever so slightly. So be it. But the wave of her hand, the oppressive weight of the infinite power that had once filled Issei's soul, began to recede. It didn't vanish entirely, he could still feel the echo of it within him, but it was quieter, less demanding. The overwhelming surge of infinity that had threatened to consume him was no longer present. You have chosen your path, Ophis said, her voice soft. The power of infinity will remain within you, but it will never reach its full potential. You are bound by your human limitations. Issei let out a breath, relief flooding through him. I can live with that. Ophis turned away, her form dissolving into the shadows. Farewell, Issei Haidu. As she vanished into the night, Issei stood there, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The power of infinity was still there, but it was no longer a burden, no longer something he feared. He had made his choice, and he had no regrets. Akeno stepped closer to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. You did it, she whispered. You chose us. Issei smiled softly, his heart full of warmth as he held her close. I'll always choose you. They stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other's embrace, the weight of their emotions settling into something peaceful. The night air was cool, but Issei felt nothing but warmth in Akeno's presence. I don't know what's going to happen next, Issei murmured, his voice soft. But whatever it is, I know I can face it with all of you by my side. Akeno looked up at him, her violet eyes filled with love. We'll face it together. Always. With renewed strength and a heart full of hope, Issei knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had made the right choice. And with Akeno, Rias, Asia, and all of his friends by his side, he would continue to fight not for power, but for love. The air was thick with tension, the moon hanging low over Kuo Academy, casting eerie shadows across the courtyard. Issei stood at the center of it all, his heart pounding in his chest, torn between two impossible choices. His humanity or the power of infinity. For weeks, he had battled internally, trying to find a balance, but now, as Ophis loomed over him, her cold, indifferent gaze fixed on him, that balance seemed more elusive than ever. His friends Rias, Akeno, Kiba, Zenobia, and Asia stood in a protective circle around him, their eyes burning with determination. They had faced countless battles together, but this felt different. This wasn't a fight for territory or honor. This was a fight for Issei's soul. You don't have to do this, Issei said quietly, his voice filled with desperation. I made my choice. I told Ophis I wasn't going to lose myself to infinity. Rias stepped forward, her crimson hair blowing in the cool night breeze. Her eyes were fierce, but there was a softness in her expression when she looked at Issei. We're not letting her take you, Issei. You belong with us. Not her. Ophis, standing at the far end of the courtyard, tilted her head slightly, her cold eyes narrowing. You misunderstand, Rias Gremory. Issei has already chosen his path. Infinity is boundless. It does not release those it touches. Ria's fists clenched, her magic crackling in the air around her. I won't let you take him from us. Without another word, the battle erupted. The wave of crimson energy shot from Ria's outstretched hand, aimed directly at Ophis. The attack hit its mark, but Ophis didn't even flinch. The force of the blast dissipated before it could touch her, like a rock swallowed by an ocean. Power born from emotion is fragile, Ophis said, her voice as calm as ever. Akeno, with lightning crackling between her fingers, leaped into the fray. Then let's see how fragile this is. Her thunderous magic exploded outward, bolts of lightning tearing through the air toward Ophis. But the infinite dragon god simply raised a hand and the lightning dispersed into nothingness. Issei watched in horror, unable to move. His friends were giving everything they had, but Ophis was untouchable, unfazed. The sheer magnitude of her power was overwhelming. "Issei, don't just stand there," Kiba shouted, his sword gleaming as he dashed forward, attempting to get close to Ophis. He slashed at her with incredible speed, but his blade stopped inches from her body, halted by an invisible barrier of raw power. Ophis's gaze turned to Issei. They fight in vain. Infinity cannot be defeated by will alone. Issei felt a chill crawl up his spine. Every fiber of his being wanted to fight, to stand beside his friends, but the weight of the power inside him, the infinity that Ophis had awoken, held him back. It whispered to him, telling him that his friends were right, but it was too late. Infinity was already a part of him, and resisting it would only cause more destruction. A sudden explosion rocked the ground, and Issei snapped back to reality. Zenobia had unleashed her holy sword, Durandal, in a massive arc, sending shockwaves toward Ophis. The impact tore through the courtyard, sending debris flying. But once again, Ophis remained untouched. Asia, standing near the edge of the battlefield, was trembling. She had never been one for combat, but the fear of losing Issei gave her the strength to stand her ground. "Issei," she called, her voice filled with desperation. "Please, fight with us. Don't let her take you." Issei's heart clenched. Asia's voice, her belief in him, was a lifeline pulling him from the abyss. But the pull of infinity was stronger than ever. It beckoned him, promising power, control, everything he thought he needed to protect the people he loved. Riaz launched another blast of destruction magic, her breath coming in heavy gasps from the effort. "Issei," she shouted, her voice raw with emotion. "You promised me you wouldn't give in. You promised you'd fight for us, for me." Issei's chest tightened as he met her gaze. The love in her eyes, the desperation, it was overwhelming. His mind flashed back to all the moments they had shared, all the battles they had fought together. And now, here she was, fighting for him. "I can't," Issei finally shouted, his voice cracking. "I can't control it. If I use this power again, I'll lose myself completely." "That's not true," Akeno cried, her voice breaking as she unleashed another wave of lightning. "You're stronger than that, Issei. We believe in you." But even as she spoke, Ophis raised her hand, and the air itself seemed to warp around her. A wave of pure infinity radiated outward, crashing into Riaz, Akeno, and the others with an overwhelming force. They were sent flying backward, hitting the ground hard. "Stop!" Issei screamed, his heart pounding in his chest. He rushed to Riaz's side as she struggled to stand, her body trembling from the impact. "Riaz." She looked up at him, her breath shallow, her eyes filled with tears. "Don't let her win, Issei. You're not a monster. You're not a tool for her to use. You're the man I love." Issei froze, her words sinking deep into his soul. Love. It was the one thing that Ophis could never offer him, the one thing that infinity could never replace. He looked at Akeno, who had managed to get to her feet, her eyes brimming with emotion. "I love you too," Akeno said softly, her voice trembling. "Please, Issei. Don't leave us." Issei's mind whirled, his heart torn between the power that surged within him and the love he felt for the people who stood before him. Ophis's offer of infinity was tempting, more tempting than anything he had ever known. But it came at the cost of everything that made him who he was. "I can't do this," Issei whispered, his voice shaking. "I can't lose you." Ophis, standing at the center of the destruction, remained unmoved. "Infinity is eternal. Love is fleeting." "No," Issei said, his voice growing stronger. "Love is what makes me who I am. It's what gives me strength." Ophis's eyes narrowed. "Then you are weak." Issei took a step forward, his hands trembling as the power of infinity roared inside him, begging to be unleashed. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't fighting for power. He was fighting for his humanity. "I'd rather be weak and have love," he said, "than be empty and alone." But that, Issei raised his hand, focusing all of his willpower on containing the infinity within him. He could feel the power surging, fighting against his control, but he held firm. He wouldn't let it consume him. Not this time. Ophis watched him with cold indifference. "You choose limitation." "I choose my humanity," Issei said, his voice filled with resolve. In that moment, a bright light burst from Issei's body, a radiant energy that wasn't infinity, but something more. It was the strength of his love, his determination to protect those who mattered most to him. The power surged through him, and for the first time, he felt in control. The wave of energy collided with Ophis's infinity, and the ground shook with the force of the impact. But this time, Issei didn't back down. He stood tall, his heart steady, his eyes fixed on Ophis. "You will not take him from us." Riaz shouted, unleashing a final blast of destruction magic, her voice filled with every ounce of her strength. Akeno followed suit, her lightning joining Riaz's magic in a brilliant display of power. Even Kiba and Zenobia joined the assault, their swords cutting through the air as they fought to protect their friend. And through it all, Issei stood firm, his heart filled with love for the people who had never given up on him. Ophis, her expression still unreadable, finally stepped back. "You have chosen your path, Issei Haidu." The energy in the air began to dissipate, the oppressive weight of infinity lifting as Ophis turned away. "Very well." With that, she vanished into the night, leaving Issei and his friends standing amidst the ruins of the battlefield. Issei collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the weight of what had just happened hit him. But as he looked up, he saw Rias, Akeno, and the others rushing toward him, their faces filled with relief. "You did it," Rias whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You chose us." Issei smiled weakly, his heart swelling with love for them. "I'll always choose you." They knelt beside him, wrapping him in their arms, their warmth a balm to his weary soul. Issei closed his eyes, knowing that he had made the right choice. He had fought for his humanity, for his love, and he had won. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The dust had barely settled in the aftermath of the battle with Ophis, but the tension in the air still lingered. The courtyard of Kuo Academy, once teeming with life, now lay in ruins, the ground scorched from the intensity of the clash. Issei stood in the middle of the Reconnecting, breathing heavily, his body trembling from the overwhelming surge of power that had coursed through him just moments ago. His friends surrounded him, Rias, Akeno, Kiba, Zenobia, and Asia, all battered and bruised, but alive. They had fought with everything they had to save him from the grip of infinity. And now, as the silence settled over them, Issei realized something profound. The power of infinity no longer terrified him. It was still there, a part of him, humming just beneath the surface. But instead of feeling like a wild, uncontrollable force, it now felt different. Calmer. Balanced. It was as though, in choosing his friends, in choosing love, he had found a way to harmonize with the power, instead of letting it consume him. Issei's gaze swept over his friends, his heart swelling with gratitude. They had fought for him, even when he had doubted himself. They had believed in him, even when he hadn't. And that belief had made all the difference. Rias approached him slowly, her crimson hair catching the faint light of the moon. She smiled, though her face was etched with exhaustion. "You did it, Issei. You found a way to control it." Issei let out a breath, relief flooding through him. "I think I finally understand," he said softly. "The power of infinity, it's not about destruction or control. It's about balance. And I couldn't find that balance until I accepted that love. My love for all of you is what makes me strong." Akeno, standing beside Rias, nodded in agreement, her violet eyes softening. "You've always had the power inside you, Issei. You just needed to realize that it doesn't have to define you." Issei smiled at her, but before he could respond, a sudden shift in the air drew his attention. Ophis, still standing at the far edge of the courtyard, watched him with her cold, unreadable gaze. She hadn't moved since the battle had subsided, and now, as the wind rustled through the trees, she stepped forward, her presence as imposing as ever. "You believe you have mastered infinity," she said quietly, her voice carrying an edge of curiosity. "But infinity cannot be tamed." Issei straightened, his gaze locking onto hers. "I'm not trying to tame it. I'm trying to live with it. And I've realized that infinity and love don't have to be opposites. They can coexist." Ophis's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a spark of intrigue. "You claim that love is your strength. That emotions can guide infinity. Show me, then. Prove that your path is the correct one." A ripple of tension passed through Issei's friends, but he stepped forward, his heart steady. He no longer feared the choice before him. He knew what he had to do. "I'm not going to fight you, Ophis," Issei said, his voice calm but firm. "Not anymore." Ophis raised an eyebrow. "You believe I will relent without a battle?" "I believe that you're searching for something, just like I was," Issei replied, his gaze unwavering. "You gave me infinity because you wanted to see if I could find the answer. And I think I have." Ophis remained silent, watching him with a piercing intensity. Issei took a deep breath, his heart swelling with conviction. "You've lived for eons, Ophis. You've seen worlds rise and fall, and through it all, you've held on to infinity because it's the one constant in your existence. But infinity isn't enough, is it? You're searching for meaning beyond power, beyond eternity." For a brief moment, Ophis's gaze flickered, a subtle shift that didn't go unnoticed. "Infinity doesn't have to exist in isolation," Issei continued. "Love, emotions, connections, they're what give us purpose. They're what make power worth having. Without them, infinity is just emptiness." Ophis's cold eyes softened, just a fraction. "You believe love can transcend infinity?" "I do," Issei said, his voice filled with certainty. "Because I've seen it. My friends, the people I care about, they give me the strength to balance the power inside me. And that's something even infinity can't take away." The silence that followed was heavy, as though the entire world held its breath. Ophis stared at Issei for what felt like an eternity, her expression unreadable. But then, slowly, she nodded. You have shown me something I did not expect, Issei Haidu, she said softly. You have found a balance that even I could not foresee. Issei's heart swelled with relief. Then you let me go. Ophis tilted her head slightly, as if considering her next words carefully. Infinity is boundless, eternal. It exists beyond the grasp of love, of emotion. But you have proven that, perhaps, there is a path that allows them to coexist. I will not take infinity from you, nor will I bind you to it. You are free to walk your own path. The weight on Issei's shoulders lifted, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank you, Ophis. Ophis turned, her form beginning to dissolve into the shadows. Remember this, Issei Haidu. Infinity is always watching. And with that, she was gone. For a moment, the courtyard was silent. Then, slowly, Riaz, Akeno, and the others gathered around Issei, their faces filled with relief and joy. You did it, Riaz said, her voice filled with pride. You found a way. Issei smiled, the weight of his journey finally easing. I couldn't have done it without all of you. As the group began to talk, share their relief, and check on each other, Issei felt a gentle tug on his sleeve. He turned to see Asia standing beside him, her emerald eyes wide with emotion. Issei, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, I was so scared. I thought we were going to lose you. Issei's heart ached at the sight of her tears, and he reached out, gently cupping her cheek. You'll never lose me, Asia. I promise. No matter what happens, I'll always come back to you. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of relief. She leaned into his touch, her voice barely a whisper. I believe you, Issei. You've always been there for us. For me. Issei smiled, his heart full. And I always will be. Asia stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. Issei held her close, feeling the warmth of her love, her unwavering faith in him. It grounded him, reminding him of why he fought, why he had chosen this path. I'll never lose myself again, he whispered into her hair. Not as long as I have you all by my side. They stood like that for a long moment, the world around them quiet and peaceful. Issei knew there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace. He had found a way to balance the power of infinity with the love he held for his friends. And in that balance, he had discovered a strength greater than any power Ophis could have given him. The power of love. The morning sun bathed Kuo Academy in golden light, casting long shadows across the peaceful courtyard. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air was calm, free from the tension and conflict that had dominated Issei's life for the past few months. As he walked through the school grounds, his mind was clear, his heart at ease. Everything had changed, yet everything felt the same. Issei had finally made peace with the power of infinity. Ophis had let him go, and he had returned to his normal life, albeit with the understanding that infinity would always be a part of him. But now, he had control, real control, not the fear-driven grasp he had once struggled with. The power no longer dictated his actions or threatened to consume him. Instead, it flowed within him, balanced by the love and support of his friends. His friends, his family. As Issei passed by the familiar sights of Kuo Academy, his thoughts drifted to the people who had stood by him through everything. Riaz, Akeno, Asia, Kiba, Zenobia, they had all fought for him, believed in him, even when he had doubted himself. And now, because of them, he was stronger not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. His steps led him to the Occult Research Club's building, a place that had become a second home to him. The front door was slightly ajar, and as he entered, he was greeted by the familiar warmth of the clubroom. The atmosphere inside was light, filled with the comfortable banter of his friends. Riaz sat at the desk, her crimson hair catching the sunlight as she looked over some papers. Akeno was preparing tea, her usual mischievous smile playing at the corners of her lips, while Asia hummed softly as she arranged flowers on the table. Kiba and Zenobia were engaged in a friendly sparring match outside, their laughter echoing through the open window. Issei paused for a moment, taking it all in. This was his life now, a life of balance, of love, of purpose. The power of infinity was there, always present, but it no longer weighed him down. It was part of him, just like his connection to Riaz, Akeno, and the others. Issei. Riaz's voice broke through his thoughts. He blinked and smiled at her, stepping further into the room. Hey Riaz. She smiled back, her sapphire eyes softening as she set down her papers. You've been quiet today. Everything okay? Yeah, Issei replied, his voice filled with warmth. Everything's more than okay. I was just thinking about how much has changed. Riaz nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment. You've been through a lot, Issei. We all have. But you've come out of it stronger than ever. Issei walked over to her, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. It wasn't just me. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Without all of you. Riaz stood, her smile soft but filled with emotion. You never had to do it alone, Issei. That's what we're here for, to help you, just like you've always helped us. Issei's chest tightened with emotion. He reached out, taking her hand in his. I know that now. And I'm never going to take it for granted again. Riaz squeezed his hand gently, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that made his heart race. You've always been special to me, Issei. From the moment I revived you, I knew there was something different about you. And now, after everything we've been through, I'm even more certain of it. Issei's breath caught in his throat. The connection between them had always been strong, but now, standing here together after everything that had happened, it felt even deeper, like an unspoken bond that couldn't be broken. Before he could speak, Akeno's voice chimed in from across the room, her tone playful. Oh my, is this a romantic moment I'm interrupting? Issei chuckled, turning to see Akeno approach with a tray of tea. She set it down on the table, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Don't let me stop you too. I'm just here to enjoy the view. Riaz rolled her eyes but smiled at her best friend. Akeno, you never change. Akeno gave a mock bow. I aim to please. Asia, who had been quietly arranging flowers, looked up and smiled shyly at Issei. It's nice to see everyone happy again. I'm so glad things are back to normal. Issei walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Thanks, Asia. You've always been the heart of this group, you know that. Asia blushed, her cheeks turning a soft pink. I just want everyone to be happy. Especially you, Issei. Issei's heart swelled at her words. He leaned in slightly, his voice soft. I promise, Asia. I'm never going to let myself get lost again. You won't ever have to worry about that. Her smile widened and she reached up to place her hand over his. I know. You're always there for us and we'll always be here for you. For a moment, Issei felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. His life, once chaotic and filled with uncertainty, had found its rhythm again. But now, it was even better because he had finally accepted that the true source of his strength came from the people he loved, not just the power he wielded. As the afternoon drifted into evening, the club members gathered around the table, sharing stories, laughter, and the warmth of each other's company. Issei watched them, his heart full, knowing that this was what he had fought for. This was what made everything worth it. As the conversation continued, Riaz caught Issei's eye and nodded toward the door, silently asking him to follow her. He obliged, curious as to what she wanted to talk about. They stepped outside, the cool evening air refreshing after the warmth of the clubroom. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun began to set. Riaz led him to a quiet spot near the edge of the school grounds, where the sound of the breeze through the trees was the only noise around them. Riaz, what's going on? Issei asked, a playful smile on his lips. She turned to face him, her expression serious but tender. I just wanted a moment with you. Alone. Issei's smile softened. You've always been able to read me better than anyone. Riaz took a deep breath, her eyes searching his. Issei, I don't think I ever really told you how much you mean to me. Not completely. Issei's heart raced. Riaz, you don't have to. No, let me finish, she interrupted gently. She stepped closer, taking both of his hands in hers. When I revived you that night, I knew you were special. But over time, you became so much more than just a member of my peerage. You became the most important person in my life. Issei felt his throat tighten as her words sank in. Riaz. She smiled, her eyes shimmering with emotion. I don't care about power or status or anything else. All I care about is you. And I want you to know that, no matter what happens, I'll always be by your side. Always. Issei's heart felt like it might burst. He had always loved Riaz, but hearing her say those words, knowing how much he meant to her, it was more than he had ever hoped for. I love you, Riaz, he said, his voice steady and full of emotion. I've loved you since the day you saved me, and I'll love you for the rest of my life. Riaz's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. I love you too, Issei. And in that moment, under the fading light of the setting sun, they leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft, tender, and filled with all the love they had for each other. It wasn't a kiss of passion or urgency, it was a kiss of promise, of a future they would face together, no matter what. When they finally pulled apart, Riaz rested her forehead against his, her breath mingling with his. This is just the beginning for us, Issei. Issei smiled, his heart full of hope and love. Yeah. A new beginning. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's embrace, the world around them quiet and still. And in that silence, Issei knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready. He had the power of infinity at his disposal, but more importantly, he had the love of his friends, his family. And that, he realized, was all he would ever need. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.